There is a form in the Galactic Contact Registry, the joint administrative body established by the 11 founding species of the cooperative sphere to manage, document, formalize the discovery of new inhabited worlds. There is a form called the GCR-7. It is 42 pages long. It has been called at various points in its 30-year existence the most comprehensive discovery documentation instrument in galactic administrative history, a monument to institutional thoroughness, and most frequently by the people who actually have to fill it out. That thing. The GCR-7 must be submitted within 72 hours of any first contact event. It requires detailed documentation of the discovered civilizations, technological level, population estimate, territorial extent, social structure, primary communication methods, apparent governmental organization, and 37 additional categories of information. There is supplementary form, the GCR-7, for cases involving unusual contact circumstances. There is a supplementary form to the supplementary form, the GCR-7b, for cases where the unusual circumstances are sufficiently unusual that the GCR-7 cannot contain them. There is no GCR-7T. There was never a GCR-7C, because the Registry's Administrative Council, in 30 years of operation, had never encountered a situation unusual enough. Require one. Until now, the situation that broke the GCR-7B, that required the Registry's Administrative Council to convene an emergency session, summon 3 additional legal consultants, review the founding charter, and ultimately draft a new document that was provisionally designated the GCR-7C, temp, pending the permanent procedurally revision that was still, as of this writing, in progress, began on a routine survey mission to a star system in the outer rim of the mapped cooperative sphere territories. The mission was led by Survey Commander Teval-Sorn of the Veltari Hegemony's Exploratory Division, a being of impeccable professional credentials and 11 years of spotless mission history. He had personally documented 6 new star systems, 3 previously unknown space phenomena, and 1 minor breakthrough in gravitational field mapping that had earned him a commendation and a very pleasant op. He had never, in 11 years, broken a form. He broke 5 of them on this mission. He also, and this is the part that would be discussed in Registry administrative training seminars for the next 40 years, personally coined the phrase that became the official designation for the class of event. His mission had uncovered a retroactive discovery, or, as it is known informally, and the informality spread quickly, the way informal names always do when they are exactly right, a human situation. The star system, designated OR 7741, had been flagged for survey on the basis of long-range spectroscopic data suggesting a habitable world in the 3rd orbital position. This was not unusual. The outer rim had dozens of such flags, all waiting their turn in the survey queue. OR 7741 had been in the queue for 11 years, which was also not unusual. Commander Teval-Sorn's vessel, the Methodical Inquiry, dropped out of FTL at the system's outer boundary on a routine mission schedule. Crew of 12, standard equipment, and the standard expectation that they would spend approximately 3 weeks documenting a probably habitable world that probably had no intelligent life, file the appropriate forms, and move on. The first indication that this was not going to be a standard mission came 12 minutes after FTL exit, when the long-range sensor array began returning data. On the 3rd planet, Commander, said Science Officer Prethval, from the sensor station, in the careful tone of someone who has found an anomaly and is not yet sure what category to file it under. I'm getting infrastructure. Teval-Sorn looked up from his mission checklist. Define infrastructure. Large-scale constructed surfaces. grid patterns consistent with urban development, thermal signatures consistent with significant population centers. Val paused. Atmospheric composition shows elevated carbon dioxide and trace industrial compounds consistent with a manufacturing economy. Another pause. Commander, I'm reading communication signal. Frequency. Val looked at her console. Then she looked at it again. Then she looked at Commander Teval-Sorn with an expression he had never seen on her face. In 4 years of working together, standard galactic trade frequency, she said. Teval-Sorn put down his checklist. Standard galactic trade frequency was the common communication band used by every spacefaring civilization in the cooperative sphere for routine interstellar commerce, navigation, coordination, and general correspondence. It was not, notably, a frequency that an undiscovered civilization would be broadcasting on. It was a frequency you used when you were already part of the galactic community. That's not possible, Teval-Sorn said. I've run the diagnostic 3 times, Val said. There's nothing in the registry about inhabited status 4 or 7741. I know. I checked the registry before departure. Standard procedure, or 7741, is listed as uninhabited. Survey pen. I know. Teval-Sorn looked at the sensor data. He looked at the communication frequency analysis. He looked at the thermal signatures, which were, he now noticed, not just consistent with population centers, but consistent with quite large population centers. The kind that showed up in the survey data of worlds with mature, established civilization. Who are they? He asked. Val had already been running the identification protocols. She looked up from her console with the expression of someone who has found the answer and is taking a moment to make sure they have the right answer before saying it out loud, because the answer is very strange. Human, she said. The bridge was very quiet. The communication signals are in a human language, Val said. Several of them. I'm reading what appears to be trade traffic, navigation, coordination, local administrative broadcasts, and she tilted her head. What I believe is a sports commentary for some kind of team competition. The home team appears to be winning. It's white. Teval-Sorn looked at the planet on his view screen. He thought about 11 years of spotless mission history. He thought about the GCR-7. He opened a channel to the planet. The response to Teval-Sorn's hailing signal came back in 40 seconds, which was fast, and in the common galactic trade language, which was expected given frequency they were broadcasting on, and in a tone that was warm, professional, and completely devoid of any quality that suggested the speaker found this situation even slightly unusual. Balthari's survey vessel. This is New Providence Orbital Traffic Control. We have you on approach at the outer boundary. Welcome to the New Providence system. Please transmit your mission classification and intended duration of visit, so we can assign you an approach corridor. Teval-Sorn stared at his communications console for a moment. New Providence Orbital Traffic Control, he said carefully. This is Survey Commander Teval-Sorn of the Methodical Inquiry. We are on a discovery survey. Mission for the Galactic Contact Registry. We are documenting this system as... He stopped. He started again. We were under the impression that this system was uninhabited. A brief pause on the other end. That's a new one, said the voice, with the cheerful equanimity of someone who has heard many things on orbital traffic control frequencies and has developed a philosophical relationship with surprise. We've been here for about 80 years, so I think we slipped through the survey queue somehow. Tell you what, I'll flag this for our external relations office, and they'll be in touch. In the meantime, can I get that mission classification? We've got a supply convoy coming in. At 14, I need the approach corridors sorted. Well, yes, but Teval-Sorn gave his mission classification. He was assigned Approach Corridor 7T. He navigated to Approach Corridor 7 in a state of slightly detached professional numbness, the way you process things that are too large and too strange. Process all at once, and he filed a priority transmission to the registry notifying them of the situation. The registry's response, which came back in 6 hours, because the registry's communications team had needed to find a supervisor, and the supervisor had needed to find a senior supervisor, and the senior supervisor had needed to make several calls, was 2-line. Received and acknowledged. Please complete GCR 7 to the best of your ability, and note all unusual circumstances in the GCR 7-supplementary section. Additional guidance to follow. Teval-Sorn opened the GCR 7. He stared at the first field, civilization designation, to be assigned upon discovery. He stared at it for a while. He typed human. He stared at the second field, technological level at time of discovery. The planet below him had orbital traffic control. It had FTL communication capability. It had, as his sensors were now confirming, at least 3 orbital platforms and what appeared to be an active shipyard in the outer belt. He typed advanced. He stared at the third field, awareness of galactic community at time of discovery. He typed fully aware, currently operating on standard galactic trade frequencies. Has assigned us an approach corridor. He got to the fourth field, first contact method. He typed. They answered the hailing signal and gave us approach corridor 7. He closed the GCR 7. He opened the GCR 7. The External Relations Office of New Providence Colony turned out to be a single room on the 4th floor of a building that also contained the Municipal Water Authority, the Transit Coordination Department, and a bakery that Teval-Sorn's crew would later describe in their personal logs, with a reverence that was technically inappropriate in official documentation, but that no one had the heart to redact. The External Relations Officer was a woman named Coordinator Blessing Okafor Singh, who was 54 years old, had held the position for 9 years, and greeted Commander Teval-Sorn and Science Officer Prethval with the particular warmth of someone who is genuinely pleased to see visitors, and also slightly smug about having visitors at all, which Teval-Sorn would later understand was because he was only the 3rd alien visitor New Providence had ever received, and ever receive. The first one who had arrived specifically because he hadn't known they existed. So, Coordinator Okafor Singh said, once they were seated with coffee, the coffee being Teval-Sorn's crew noted in 4 separate personal logs, extraordinary. You were trying to discover us. The registry had the system listed as uninhabited, Teval-Sorn said, with the careful diplomacy of someone who is trying to explain a situation without assigning blame until he understands where the blame goes. Survey pending. We followed standard procedure. 80 years in the queue is a long time, Prethval offered. We're not complaining, Coordinator Okafor Singh said pleasantly. It's been very peaceful. We like it out here. She looked at them. I imagine you have questions. Several, Teval-Sorn confirmed. YG. The main one being, Prethval said, because she had been thinking about it for 6 hours, and was not built for patience, how a human colony of she checked her sensor records. Approximately 2.5 million people has existed in this system for 80 years without appearing in the registry. That's a great question, Coordinator Okafor Singh said, without the slightest trace of guilt. The short answer is, we applied for registration. Silence. You applied, Teval-Sorn said. About 70 years ago, she said, when we were getting properly established. The colony founders felt it was important to be properly documented in the Galactic Community Records, GAL. There was a whole vote about it. Very spirited debate. Some people felt we should maintain a lower profile until we had better FTL infrastructure. But the majority position was that proper documentation was important. You applied 70 years ago, Teval said slowly. Filed the paperwork and everything. GCR2, I think it was at the time. The initial settlement registration form. Teval-Sorn made a note to find the GCR2 filing 4 or 7,1741. Then made a second note that this was almost certainly going to involve a conversation with the Registry's Administrative Archives Division that he was not going to enjoy. And the response to your application? He asked. Coordinator Okafor Singh's expression did something very specific. The expression of a person who has been waiting, patiently and without malice, for someone to finally ask the right question. Pending, she said. The silence was very complete. It's been pending for 70 years, she said. We send a status inquiry every 10 years. The response is always the same. Your application under review. Expected processing time, variable. We stopped worrying about it eventually. Things run pretty smoothly, whether or not the registry knows we're here. She picked up her coffee. Although I will say, I'm glad you're here. It'll be nice to get sorted. Teval-Sorn thought about the GCR Savina supplementary form. He thought about the field marked unusual circumstances. He thought about whether civilization applied for a galactic registration 70 years ago, and application remains pending constituted unusual circumstances, or whether, in the broader context of this mission, it was simply the latest entry in what was becoming the longest unusual circumstances section in registry history. He filled in the field. He added a note at the bottom. Recommend urgent review of registry GCR2 backlog. Maybe additional cases. He had no idea how right he was. The registry's administrative audit, triggered by Teval-Sorn's mission report, and the subsequent discovery of the 70-year-old pending GER2 application 40, New Providence Colony, took 8 months and produced findings that the registry's administrative council described in the official summary as significant and requiring comprehensive procedural reform, and that the administrative council's junior staff described in the break room and in increasingly candid interspecies communications as the most spectacular administrative failure in galactic history, and honestly kind of impressive when you think about how consistently wrong it managed to be. The audit found 14 human colonial settlements across 11 star systems that had been operating in the outer rim for periods ranging from 30 to 112 years, none of which appeared in the registry as inhabited systems, all of which had at some point, in most cases multiple points, submitted registration paperwork that was currently pending. 3 human-claimed territorial zones, formally staked under the cooperative sphere's settlement rights protocols, that had been filed correctly, acknowledged, as received, and then assigned to a processing queue that, upon investigation, had not been actively reviewed in 23 years. 1 human colony, the oldest, on a world they had named Hearthstone, that had submitted registration paperwork, received a denial on technical grounds, resubmitted with corrections, received a second denial on different technical grounds, resubmitted with further corrections, and then received a third denial that the audit determined had been sent to the wrong address and had never actually been delivered, which meant that the colony of 400,000 people on Hearthstone had technically been in a state of unresolved administrative rejection for 40 years without anyone involved being aware of it. And the one that made the registry's senior administrators go very quiet for a very long time. 1 human colony that had simply never filed any paperwork at all, on the grounds that, as the colony's founder had apparently recorded in the original settlement log, the registry seems very busy, and we don't want to bother them. I see. The colony had been established 63 years ago. It had a population of 800,000. It had built an orbital station, a shipyard, and a university. It had, 63 years ago, named itself Hope's Landing and sent a very nice message to the nearest cooperative sphere relay station, saying that they were settling there and hoped that was all right, and had never followed up because the relay station had not responded, which it had not because the relay station was automated, and the message had been filed in the automated system's general correspondence queue under the subject header colony. 412 other messages with similar headers, none of which had been reviewed because the queue had been designated low priority in a staffing reorganization 27 years ago. The audit's final count was 14 settlements, 1 territory claim, backlog, 1 misdelivered rejection, and Hope's Landing. Total unregistered human population in systems the registry had listed as uninhabited, approximately 8 million people. The registry's administrative council submitted a formal apology to the Human Cooperative Spheres Diplomatic Division. The Human Cooperative Spheres Diplomatic Division received the apology, responded with characteristic warmth, and noted gently, helpfully, entirely without recrimination, that there might be a few more. There were 7 more. Commander Teval-Sorn spent 3 weeks on New Providence Colony, while the formal documentation process was completed, and he spent those 3 weeks in a state that began as professional bewilderment and transitioned, gradually and somewhat against his will, into something that he would later describe in his personal log as reluctant enchantment. New Providence was not what he had expected a human colony to look like, partly because he had not known it existed long enough to form an expectation, but also because it was simply different from the human worlds he had visited before. Older in feel, more settled, with the particular quality of a place that had been building its identity for 80 years without external input, and had therefore built something that was entirely, irreducibly itself. The city where Coordinator Okafor Singh's office was located, the capital, such as it was, a word that the New Providence residents used with a slight ironic distance that suggested they found the concept of capital slightly formal for their purposes, had wide streets and low buildings and an absolute profusion of trees that had clearly been planted in the early settlement period and had grown over 80 years into a canopy so complete that large portions of the city were permanently in a kind of green filtered light that fell differently from any light Teval-Sorn had experienced on any other world. The people were, he found, different from the human diplomats and contact specialists he had dealt with before, not in kind. They were unmistakably human in every behavioral and biological sense, but in degree. There was a quality to them that he eventually identified through careful observation as the complete absence of the particular self-consciousness that came from knowing you were being looked at by the galactic community. The humans he had met in diplomatic contexts always carried, at some level, the awareness that they were representing their civilization. The people of New Providence did not represent anything. They were just people, living their lives. Why did you? Why? Or question, growing their trees. He found it extraordinarily restful. On his last day, Coordinator Okafor Singh took him to a hilltop outside the city, from which, on a clear day, you could see the full extent of the settled land, the farms and the forests and the river that ran through everything and the distant glint of the orbital station. And she said with the quiet pride of someone who had lived in a place long enough to love it past the point where love required justification, "This is what 80 years looks like." Teval-Sorn looked at it. He thought about the GCR-7, about the pending application that had been pending for 70 years, about the audit findings, about 14 settlements and 8 million people living quietly in the outer rim, building their trees, naming their worlds after hope and new starts and hearts of stone. You weren't trying to hide, he said. It was not a question. Well, he had understood this over 3 weeks with increasing clarity. Of course not, she said. We filed the paperwork. You were just, well, he searched for the word. Getting on with it. We had a lot to do, she said simply. Planets don't settle themselves, and the registry seemed like something that would sort itself out eventually. She looked out at the settlement. Was it very confusing, finding us? Somewhat, he said, with the diplomatic understatement of a being who had filed 4 forms and a supplementary form to the supplementary form and was currently awaiting guidance on the provisional GCR 7 temp type. She laughed. I'm sorry about that. If it helps, and I mean this genuinely, we're very glad you came. She looked at him. We've been out here for 80 years. We have everything we need, but it's good to be found. It's good for someone to come over the hill and say, you're here, we see you, welcome to the neighborhood. You are quiet. She paused, even if the welcome is 80 years late. Teval-Sorn thought about that. He thought about it on the flight back. He thought about it while completing the final sections of the GCR-7 and the GCR-7A and the GCRA-7B and the provisional GCR-7 temp. He thought about it when the registry's senior administrator sent him a personal message, thanking him for the thoroughness of his documentation and gently noting that the audit had identified 3 further pending applications that had been in the queue for longer than the New Providence 1, and asking if he had any bandwidth for additional survey missions. He said yes, because here was the thing he could not quite formulate precisely in any official document, but that was, he felt certain, the actual finding of the facts. Mission way, or every one of those worlds out there, every settlement, every colony, every 800,000 people who had sent a nice message to an automated relay station and then gotten on with planting their trees, had been doing something extraordinary. They had looked at a piece of empty space and decided it was us. Home, but they had built from nothing 70 years of ordinary life. Of schools and bakeries and orbital stations and sports teams whose home side was currently winning Godfrey. They had not waited for permission or registration or a survey vessel to arrive over the hill and document their existence. They had simply existed, fully, specifically, irreplaceably. 8 million people in 14 systems, living in the gap between the official record and the actual universe, building the future one unhurried day at a time. Wine. He filed his final report. In the unusual circumstances section, after the 7 pages of bureaucratic detail, he added a personal note that was, strictly speaking, not required by GCR-7 procedure, but that the registry's administrative council would later confirm they were very glad he had included. It read, "The human colonies in the Outer Rim are, collectively, a reminder that the official record is not the same as the actual universe. The universe contains more than we have charted. It always will. The appropriate response to this is not to chart faster. It is to approach the unchartedness with the understanding that things have been growing there in the meantime, unlooked at and unworried at, and that finding them is not a correction of an error, but a gift. New Providence Colony makes an extraordinary coffee. I recommend the registry consider including provisions for beverage documentation in the revised GCR-7C permanent form. It seems relevant to the full picture." The registry's administrative council sent a formal reply, noting that beverage documentation was outside the scope of current procedural reform. Teval-Sorn filed a counter-note, suggesting they reconsider. They did not reconsider. He remained, for the rest of his career, convinced they were wrong. The permanent registration of New Providence Colony and the 12 other settlements confirmed during the audit. Hope's Landing's application was the last to resolve, owing to the question of whether 63 years of non-filing constituted a waiver of registration rights that took 4 months and 2 additional legal consultants to definitively answer. It did not was completed in a ceremony that the registry's administrative division organized with the thoroughness that characterized all their work, and that the human colonies attended with the cheerful, slightly bemused energy of people who had been getting on fine, without official recognition for several decades, and were genuinely pleased to have it, but did not feel that it changed anything essential. Coordinator Okafor Singh attended as the senior colonial representative. She brought coffee. Enough for everyone. At the reception afterward, a junior registry administrator found himself standing next to her, holding a cup of New Providence blend, and said, because he was junior enough to still ask the questions that senior people had learned not to ask, did it ever bother you, not being in the registry, not being officially found? She considered the question with the thoughtfulness she gave everything. Not really, she said. We knew we were here. The people who mattered knew we were here. She looked out the reception hall window at the starfield. The registry is a record. Records are important. But the thing being recorded, she smiled, the thing being recorded was happening whether or not anyone was writing it down. She drank her coffee. We always were here, she said simply. Now the paperwork knows it too. In the registry's administrative archive, in a filing system that was currently undergoing the most comprehensive reform in its 30-year history, there was a new folder. It was labeled Human Systems, Active Registration. It contained 21 entries. At the bottom of the folder, in a subdirectory labeled Pending Review, flagged for possible additional cases, there was a single note from the audit team. It read, "It is the opinion of this audit team that the 21 confirmed cases do not represent the full extent of human colonial activity in unregistered systems. Further survey missions are recommended. Suggest prioritizing systems in the outer rim with low historical survey traffic. We are cautiously optimistic that the additional cases, when found, will also have good coffee."